Ukraine caught 34 Russian tanks refueling at night. What happened next was brutal.
March 15, 2025, 2:34 a.m. Eastern Ukraine near the town of Avdiivka. 34 Russian tanks are lined up in the darkness, refueling. Their engines are running low. The crews are tired. They think they're safe. They're not. In less than 20 minutes, this entire column will be destroyed. But how did Ukraine find them, and what made this attack so devastating? Let me take you back to understand why this moment mattered so much. By March 2025, the war in Ukraine had been going on for over 2 years. Every day brought new battles. Every night brought new dangers. Russia had thousands of tanks scattered across the front line. Ukraine was always outnumbered. The math was simple and brutal. For every 10 Russian tanks, Ukraine had maybe 3 or 4. Every single Russian tank destroyed meant something real. It meant fewer threats to Ukrainian cities, fewer attacks on civilian areas, fewer soldiers in danger on the front lines. But here's the thing about tanks. They don't just sit around waiting to be hit. They move constantly. They hide in tree lines. They're protected by layers of defense. Air defense systems watch the sky above them. Infantry guards their flanks. Electronic warfare equipment jams enemy signals. Getting close enough to destroy even one tank is incredibly difficult. You need intelligence. You need the right weapons. You need perfect timing. Now imagine destroying 34 in one night. The challenge was enormous. By 2025, Russian forces had learned hard lessons. They had lost hundreds of tanks in the first year of the war. They adapted. They changed their tactics. They moved supplies at night instead of during the day. They used decoys to fool Ukrainian drones. They spread out their vehicles to avoid getting hit all at once. Tank columns were usually protected by reconnaissance drones, electronic warfare systems, and anti-aircraft guns. For Ukraine to succeed, everything had to be perfect. They needed to know exactly where the tanks would be. They needed the right weapons positioned at the right distance. They needed clear weather for their drones to see, and they needed to strike before the Russians realized what was happening. One mistake, one wrong calculation, and the entire operation would fail. The Russians would scatter. The opportunity would be gone forever. This is where Ukrainian military intelligence came in. For weeks before this attack, Ukrainian intelligence officers had been watching Russian supply routes. Not just watching randomly. They were looking for patterns. How often did tank units need to refuel? Where did they go? What routes did they take? What time of day did they move? They used satellites when they could get access. They flew high-altitude drones. They listened to Russian radio communications. They had scouts on the ground reporting vehicle movements. And slowly a pattern emerged. Every few days, Russian tank units would pull back from the front line to refuel. They couldn't do it right at the front, too dangerous, too exposed, so they would drive back several kilometers to designated refueling points. These points were always chosen carefully, somewhere hidden from aerial view, somewhere with good tree cover, somewhere the Russians thought was safe from Ukrainian artillery. Ukrainian intelligence officers began mapping these locations. They noticed something interesting. The Russians kept using the same few spots over and over. They thought they were being clever by rotating between them, but to Ukrainian analysts it was predictable. One particular refueling point near Avdiivka caught their attention. It was in a small forest clearing about 8 kilometers behind Russian lines, far enough back that Russian commanders probably felt safe. Close enough to the front that tanks didn't waste too much fuel getting there. The location had good tree cover from above. And here's the key detail. Russian units had used this exact spot 4 times in the past 3 weeks. Ukrainian scouts tracked radio communications from that area. They monitored thermal signatures using drones flying high above. They mapped out the exact routes Russian convoys used. They noted the timing, usually between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the darkest hours of the night. Then, on the evening of March 14th, Ukrainian signals intelligence picked up something important. Encrypted Russian radio traffic indicated a large mechanized unit was preparing to move. The communication patterns matched previous refueling operations. Intelligence officers immediately began tracking the unit. By 11 p.m., they had their answer. A Russian mechanized battalion was moving away from the front line. The direction matched the route to that refueling point near Avdiivka. Thermal imaging from drones confirmed it. 34 tanks plus multiple fuel trucks, support vehicles, all heading to the same location. This was bigger than anything Ukraine had seen in weeks. Intelligence officers immediately contacted artillery units in the area. They checked ammunition supplies. Did they have enough rockets? Yes. Were the launch systems operational? Yes. They confirmed drone operators were ready. The strike had to be perfectly timed. Too early and not all the tanks would be there yet. Too late and they might finish refueling and leave. Everything had to happen in a narrow window of 15 to 20 minutes. Ukrainian forces began moving into position. Artillery batteries were already deployed about 12 kilometers away from the target area, far enough to stay safe from Russian counter-battery fire. close enough to hit with accuracy. They were using American-supplied M142 HIMARS rocket systems, 6 of them. Each HIMARS carries 6 GPS-guided rockets. They also had Soviet-era BM-27 Uragan rocket launchers as backup. Each weapon system was loaded and ready. Coordinates were programmed into the HIMARS guidance computers. Artillery crews ran through their checklists. Everything had to work perfectly. Meanwhile, drone operators launched reconnaissance drones to watch the refueling site in real time. These weren't attack drones. They were eyes in the sky sending live video back to commanders. High-definition cameras, thermal imaging. The drones climbed to 3,000 meters, high enough to be out of range of most Russian anti-aircraft weapons. Everyone waited. The tension was unbearable. Soldiers checked their equipment again and again. Officers stared at video screens showing the empty refueling point. Minutes felt like hours. At 2:22 a.m., movement appeared on the drone feeds. The first Russian tanks rolled into the refueling point, dark shapes moving through the trees, then more appeared, and more, tank after tank entering the clearing. Crews began climbing out to stretch their legs. Fuel lines were connected from the fuel trucks to the tanks. By 2:36 a.m., all 34 tanks were at the refueling point. They were packed relatively close together, maybe 50 meters between each one. Russian soldiers moved around the site, some smoked cigarettes, others drank tea. A few stood guard, but they weren't particularly alert. Why would they be? They were 8 kilometers behind their own lines. They had no idea Ukrainian drones were watching from above. The Ukrainian commander made his decision. This was the moment. He gave the order, fire. Artillery crews sprang into action. HIMARS launchers elevated their pods, firing sequences initiated. Within seconds, the first rockets launched, 6 rockets from the first HIMARS, then 6 more from the second, 12 rockets total in the first wave. They climbed into the night sky, then arced downward, guided by GPS. But here's where things almost went wrong. Just as the rockets were launched, Russian electronic warfare systems detected unusual activity. Their sensors picked up electromagnetic signatures from Ukrainian drones. Warning lights flashed. Electronic warfare officers activated their jamming equipment. Powerful radio signals flooded the area. 2 Ukrainian drones immediately lost their video feed. Their cameras went black. For a moment, artillery crews couldn't see their target. They had already fired 12 rockets, but they didn't know if they would hit, and they were about to launch the second wave. Some commanders considered calling off the second wave. If the Russians realized they were under attack, the tanks would scatter. Other commanders argued the opposite. Fire everything now while the tanks were still packed together. The debate lasted maybe 5 seconds, then one drone reconnected. Its signal broke through the jamming. The video feed flickered back to life. The refueling site was still there. The tanks hadn't moved. The commander made the call, fire the second wave, fire everything. More HIMARS launchers fired. Then the Uragan systems joined in. The sky filled with rocket trails. The first salvo hit with devastating accuracy. Ukrainian officers watching the drone feed saw it happen in real time. 12 rockets, 12 explosions right in the middle of the refueling site. Massive fireballs erupted across the clearing. Fuel trucks exploded first. Burning fuel sprayed everywhere. Tanks that were mid-refuel caught fire instantly. The thermal cameras showed chaos. Russian soldiers ran in every direction. Tank crews scrambled to get their vehicles started. Engines roared to life, but there was no time. 12 seconds later, another barrage of rockets slammed into the site. Artillery crews had adjusted their aim based on the drone feed. They targeted tanks that were trying to move. The HIMARS systems had accuracy within 10 meters. Even through smoke and chaos, they found their targets. Explosion after explosion ripped through the column. Tank armor cracked. Ammunition stored inside tanks began cooking off. When a tank's ammunition explodes, the turret often blows completely off. Ukrainian drone operators watched as several tank turrets launched into the air, spinning before crashing back down. Then the Uragan rockets arrived. Dozens of rockets landing across the entire clearing. The noise must have been deafening. The ground shook, trees caught fire. The entire forest seemed to be burning. Russian forces tried to respond. Anti-aircraft guns opened fire blindly into the sky. But Ukrainian drones were too high, too small to hit. Russian electronic warfare kept jamming, but it was too late. Some Russian tank crews showed incredible bravery. Despite everything, they got their vehicles started. 3 tanks broke away from the main group. They headed for the exit road. They were trying to escape. Ukrainian artillery operators saw them on the drone feed. Officers radioed new coordinates. The launchers adjusted. Within 30 seconds, 3 more rockets were in the air. All 3 tanks were hit before they made it 200 meters. The entire attack lasted 17 minutes. When the smoke began to clear, Ukrainian drones surveyed the damage. 34 tanks destroyed or disabled, 6 fuel trucks completely destroyed, several support vehicles torn apart, fires burned everywhere. Some explosions continued for another hour as ammunition cooked off. But the impact went far beyond just the numbers. It was about psychological warfare, about showing Russian forces they couldn't move safely anywhere. Not at the front, not behind their lines. Ukrainian intelligence was watching. Ukrainian artillery could reach them. Nowhere was truly safe. It proved that Western-supplied weapons like HIMARS could be used with deadly precision when combined with good intelligence. Each HIMARS rocket costs about $150,000. A Russian tank costs over $3 million. In terms of cost-effectiveness, this strike was incredibly efficient. It sent a message to every Russian tank crew: your commanders can't protect you. That thought affects morale, it makes soldiers cautious, it makes them second-guess orders. In the days after the attack, Ukrainian forces noticed something interesting. Russian tank movements became more cautious. They stopped using that refueling point entirely. They abandoned 2 other similar sites. They started spacing out their vehicles more during supply runs. They increased their use of decoys. Some units started refueling tanks one at a time instead of in groups. All of these changes made Russian operations slower and more complicated. More fuel was wasted. More time was spent on logistics. Ukraine's single strike had forced Russia to change its entire approach to tank logistics in that sector. For Ukraine, this victory was a reminder of what's possible when intelligence, technology, and timing come together. It showed the value of patience, of watching and waiting for the right moment. 34 tanks lost in one night. That's an entire battalion wiped out without a single Ukrainian soldier getting close. It's the kind of operation that military academies will study for years. The operation also demonstrated something important about modern warfare. Technology matters, precision weapons matter, but intelligence matters most of all. Without knowing where those tanks would be, the weapons would have been useless. The real victory was in the weeks of surveillance that made the strike possible. So here's my question for you. If you were commanding those Russian forces, what would you have done differently? Should they have used multiple smaller sites, posted more sentries, changed locations more frequently? Could this have been prevented? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about modern warfare and the battles that change everything, hit that like button. Subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. There's a lot more to cover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next.